Soon after America's entry into World War II, the U.S. Army 8th Air Force moved its headquarters to England. There, it joined the Royal Air Force in a massive buildup of air bases from which British and American heavy bombers could launch air attacks against Nazi Germany's war machine. On August 17, 1942, a formation of only 12 B-17 bombers of the 97th Bomb Group flew the first heavy bomber raid by the American forces. The target was Rouen, France. Colonel Frank Armstrong was the air commander for the mission. Under the leadership of such generals as Toohey Spotts, Ira Aker, and Jimmy Doolittle, the 8th became the greatest air armada in history. At peak strength, the 8th could put up more than 2,000 four-engine bombers and 1,000 fighters on a single mission. For these reasons, it became known as the Mighty 8th. The 100th Bomb Group, a B-17 Flying Fortress unit, joined the 8th Air Force in England in May 1943. It took over a former RAF aerodrome situated near the village of Thorpe Abbotts. The rural countryside of East Anglia in northeast England was noted for its picturesque villages, sprawling farms, and friendly people. Their slow, quiet lifestyles, formed by hundreds of years of tradition and customs, quickly changed and would never again be the same. The Yanks had arrived. The British viewed the arrival of thousands of spirited young Americans with mixed emotions, grateful that they had arrived to help battle Hitler's Germany, but baffled, bewildered, and a little irritated by their freewheeling American ways. A little culture clash? Maybe. But a little fascination? Oh, I think so. My name is Ralph Story, and as your host, I can relate to this and many other wartime experiences because I served in England as a P-51 pilot assigned to the 8th Air Force.
Good morning.
Many years later, accompanied by family and friends, graying veterans of the 100th Bomb Group and other units, those same high-spirited young men who were stationed here during the war years, have returned to England on emotional pilgrimages to visit the areas where they experienced some of the most exciting times of their younger lives.
Morning. Good to see you again. And you.
The natives of Thorpe Abbotts and neighboring villages, where an airfield was located, have joined forces and contributed their time and resources to restoring part of the old base, including the original control tower. A permanent museum and memorial has been established as an everlasting tribute to their friends, those freewheeling Americans.
First, this morning, we salute three nations. The Queen for Britain. United States of America.
I have been asked by the writer of this letter to read this to you, and I am greatly honored to do so. 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister. Over 40 years ago, the United States 8th Army Air Force, under its great leaders, General Eaker and his successor, General Doolittle, came to this country to join with our own Royal Air Force Bomber Command in the strategic air offensive against Nazi Germany. Of all its formations, none had a more distinguished record than the 100th Bomb Group, which flew continuously on operations from the middle of 1943 to the end of the war. We in the United Kingdom will forever be grateful to you and your comrades, and I am delighted that the members of your association have been able to return to see us once again. I know all too well that your group paid a heavy price. Regensburg, Bremen, Munster, and Berlin are names that doubtless none of you will ever forget. And your nickname, the Bloody 100th, is one of which you have every reason to be proud. Also, we must remember those who gave their lives in the cause of freedom so many years ago. By coming back to visit us, you are not only helping to renew the bonds between our two nations, but also showing that you recall those of your number who never went home. To all of you attending this reunion weekend, American, French, and British, I send my warmest greetings. Margaret Thatcher, September 1986.
This is the Armed Forces Radio Service with the news from New York. Sergeant Riley Jackson reporting. Massed fleets of 8th Air Force B-17s and B-24s hammered the heart of Germany's aircraft industry during daylight yesterday. Their fourth major blow in 5 days. Berlin, Regensburg, Munster, and Schweinfurt all came under heavy attack.
Now, many years later, this is former Sergeant Riley Jackson visiting a base where that World War II story and many others like it actually had their beginnings. It is to this field where members of the 100th Bomb Group were stationed that they and others of the 8th Air Force come back to renew wartime friendships, to relive exciting experiences, and to visit the graves of men who died in combat. At that time, a young boy of some 14 years who lived on a farm not far from here and was keenly appreciative of the fact that these men and their equipment had arrived to help his countrymen defeat a common enemy.
Thus, the seeds were planted that grew into lifelong friendships between Roger Freeman and the men and women who were stationed at these bases during the war. Our English co-host, Roger Freeman, noted humorist, author, and highly regarded as the top historian on 8th Air Force operations in England during the war, can probably best describe the British reaction to the arrival of the Americans during the early stages of World War II.
You know, when you fellas arrived here, the Americans weren't really welcomed. This was a very rural area, miles away from anywhere. And in those days, there was no electricity or mains water or sewerage. It really was a rather depressed agricultural area. And the people here had never seen anything like you. The only thing they knew about Americans was the Americans they'd seen on the movies. And suddenly, the impact of 3,000 young men, each young man wanting to do his own thing amongst them, was quite a thing for anybody to take. And so there was a great deal of suspicion, particularly amongst the farmers. I can remember a story about one farmer whose farm was surrounded by Nissen hut camps. And he went to market about 6 months after the Americans arrived, and he saw an old buddy. And the old buddy came up to him and said, "Hi, Horace, how are you getting on with them there Yankees?" And Horace, he said, "Getting on," he exploded. "Getting on," he said, "I'll tell you how I'm getting on with them. Since they've been there, my gateposts have been knocked down, my cat's been run over, my dog's run away, my apples have been stolen, my hens are gone off the lay, my daughter's pregnant and my wife has run off with one, and I can't drown me sorrows because the beggars have drunk all the pubs dry."
You buddy.
Yes, how are you? Who's it? Claire Harden. Hello, Claire. How are you? My God, I've been waiting much to see you. How have you been?
Well, just great. How have you been?
Just great. Yeah.
I said, my God, I jumped down with the guy.
40
years ago.
You landed in the tree.
Right.
You had to be the luckiest guy in the world. You bail out of a burning airplane, you land in a tree, you're almost run over by a British convoy.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I remember it kind of knocked you out, didn't it?
I'm still out.
Yeah, you're still out.
We never did really recover from that.
But do you remember about the time you came to and the lovely lady was standing there and she said...
I'd rather not go into that at this point.
Harry Crosby, you were a navigator. What do you remember of this place and what sort of reaction?
Well, what I remember mostly is just how much of it was going on. You'd come up and the B-17s would come in and you'd count how many were coming back, and there was just always a big excitement, something big going on all the time. It was a big operation, a lot of people and a lot of important stuff going on.
It really holds dear memories for you.
Yeah, my heart beats strong, the tears come to the eyes. Yeah, John was saying that he was got teary about it, I know.
John Swartz, what did you do?
Well, I was run the photo lab.
What's this place mean to you? What do you feel coming back here?
Well, what I remember mostly is when we were sweating out the planes, we were wondering if we had any pictures, because sometimes all the planes were shot down that had cameras on them.
You didn't care about the guys, it was the pictures.
Yeah, that's what I noticed. I was counting the planes.
We had to get those pictures or we were in trouble.
Irv Waterbury,
Yes, sir.
now you were in communications, but didn't you have another job?
I had my first love, the band. The band, the band for dance band, for the officers, the band. We had a marvelous time. We really contributed to the morale.
Oh, they did. Glenn Miller won better.
Glenn Miller won better, and the greatest day was when Glenn came to the base, Roger. Seemed like a crowd like this, and it was tearful and wonderful and never forgotten it.
Well, fellas, there's a big crowd here today at this dedication and air show. It's really something, isn't it? You must get a hell of a thrill out of this. This abandoned collection of tin can huts and concrete roads was once a piece of a bomb group's home. What's a bomb group? A bomb group was a self-contained American Air Force organization placed on one English airfield with 3,000 brash young Americans who cursed about our weather, complained about our weak beer, and, or almost every morning, would wake us with the throb and drone of their bombers going to war. But that was a long, long time ago. This is the intersection of two concrete runways, both over a mile long. Once they were highways to a battlefield in the sky. From these very runways, some 2,000 young men never returned. I find these places very evocative because they bring back childhood memories of standing at the end of runways such as this and watching the fortresses and liberators pound along them, the pilots keeping them down to the very end of the runway. They were heavily loaded with bombs and fuel, and then the pilot would pull back on the stick and the aircraft would stagger into the sky. For us kids, each takeoff was a thrill, but for the young men inside, they must have been filled with apprehension because they knew that if a motor failed, that within seconds, they would probably crash. They would buy the farm.
Tuesday, August 17, 1943, a date of awesome significance in the history of World War II. American bombers had penetrated the Luftwaffe's most savage and determined fighter defense umbrella to destroy one of Germany's key targets, the Messerschmitt aircraft works. For Hitler's Germany, this was an unbelievable shock. For the fledgling United States 8th Air Force, barely a year old and operating out of bases in England, it proved conclusively the case for daylight precision bombing of enemy targets. The 3rd Division was commanded by a young colonel by the name of Curtis E. LeMay. His outstanding leadership in directing his crews from the lead plane was truly remarkable. His performance was to have a profoundly favorable impact on future command assignments and responsibilities. Now, it's General LeMay. And I'm certain he still remembers August 17, 1943. You won't have any trouble if I ask you about the importance of that mission then. Why was it so important?
Well, I think it was a combination of the two targets that we wanted to hit on this mission that made it so important. The other target was Schweinfurt. I first heard of the mission early in July of 1943 when General Aker came out visited my headquarters and told me about the importance of the ball bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the desirability of hitting them as early as possible. This was exceptionally important at the time because this is the deepest that we'd ever penetrated into Germany, and we had very few fighters and they didn't have their belly tanks yet, and we didn't have the P-51s yet. So we'd have to accomplish this mission, a great deal of it, without fighter escort. So it called for some unusual planning. And the plan was that the 3rd Division, which was the newest form and had the latest B-17s with the longer range tanks, would lead the 8th Air Force in, bypassing Schweinfurt and hitting the Messerschmitt plant over on the Austrian border, which was an important target in that it produced a great percentage of the 109 fighter airplanes that were being turned out at the time. And then instead of coming back to England and fighting the German Air Force on the way back, we would go out through the Brenner Pass over northern Italy and land down in North Africa.
A forecast of the importance of the mission scheduled for today was evident as the ground crews prepared the giant bombers for combat. Orders from headquarters of the 8th Air Force called for a maximum effort operation. All flyable planes were scheduled to take part with extra fuel and ammunition aboard. One of the major problems that plagued advanced planning in England was the unpredictable weather, and this mission was no exception. Half the forces committed to the operation, including the all-important fighter support experienced a costly delay in takeoff, placing the entire mission in jeopardy. Of the many bomber units participating, the 100th Bomb Group crews took an especially heavy beating. Of the 21 fortresses that left their base in England early that morning, 9 had been shot from the skies before the target at Regensburg had been reached. Captain Everett Blakely had proven to be a skillful pilot and a natural-born leader. He was only 24 years old when he was assigned the responsibility of leading the entire 100th Bomb Group formation on this critical shuttle mission to North Africa. Our guests are 2 men who were there, Ev Blakely and Bob Wolfe. So let's start with you, Ev. If you were to sum up the importance of the Regensburg raid, would it be the damage? Would it be the target?
The thing that made this very significant as a mission was strategy. Our strategy in bombing was precision bombing in daylight, and the British had their night bombing, and this was the first big test of our 8th Air Force bombing strategically deep in Germany, pinpointing target and taking on enemy action and hopefully getting back without severe losses. This was the big test for our strategy as an Air Force.
Now let me ask Bob, do you remember that day particularly, Bob? The weather or anything else special?
I remember the day, and I remember the weather. It was a beautiful day once we got over the channel and over onto the continent. Beautiful blue sky. We crossed the coast, give or take a few minutes, about 10 o'clock in the morning, and we were jumped by the fighters from that moment on.
How long did this last, Bob?
About 2 hours.
2 hours?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's you mentioned how long 2 or 3 minutes could be.
Well,
I hate to try and
it seemed like
stretch.
an eternity. About 5 minutes before we actually started the bomb run, the fighters, for some reason, disappeared. Maybe it was a small prayer that I uttered. I don't know.
They disappeared?
Well, at least they quit bothering us to
Just
that
before
extent.
the target?
Yeah.
So you had a clear run at the target?
We had a pretty clear run at the target and managed to plaster it very well.
We had excellent results on our bombing, and the plant was not completely destroyed, but it was completely out of action for about 3 months.
Could you see the bomb hits?
Yes, yes.
I mean, you could see the success as it was taking place?
Yes, and we took pictures as it was taking place. Of course, after the first bombs hit, there's nothing but a lot of smoke around there. The pictures are not much good to strike photos, but you could tell whether they got in the target area or not. And then we usually followed it up with what we call post-strike reconnaissance to show the results after the fires as smoke had cleared away.
So the bombing mission itself, despite the losses, was a success?
Was a success, yes.
Now, beyond that, you've now hit the target, but you're a long way from home.
Yes, we are. It's a long ways to North Africa, and we've gone through a pretty hectic experience, and the command is straggling out in spots that I didn't like. So after leaving the target, I made a couple of free circles to get them back together again before going across Italy, because we might have gotten fighter attacks from Italian-based fighters.
But that circle's going to use up some more gas.
Well, that's right. It's a compromise of trying to get your troops in the best possible position for another attack, but at the same time you're using up gasoline that you might need at the other end.
Now you've got a tight group going across the Alps, and
well,
I would think that's hazardous.
Not as tight as I'd like it. When we got on the other side, I decided I'd better close them up a little bit more, so we made a couple circles over Lake Como to get in better shape. Then went on down between the mainland of Italy and Sardinia and Corsica at sea, and went on into North Africa.
But you're now all running out of gas over the Mediterranean.
We're low on gasoline. Some of the airplanes, actually, we dropped a couple, three in the Mediterranean. I think we lost one crew in the Mediterranean. 2 crews, I think, were picked up by the sea rescue people.
We'd had severe tail damage to our aircraft that was causing us to use more gasoline than we had anticipated. And as we crossed the Mediterranean on our way into Africa, all the red lights started blinking on the gas gauges, which indicated we were getting pretty low. And as we made our final approach to land, we simply could not go around, even though the tower at the field had told us to. The aircraft simply would not get up any more speed. When we did get off the runway, we got far enough off, and I just cut the engines and stopped right there.
Our landing was quite normal at Tralegma.
How many planes left?
9 left out of the 21 we started out with.
Where'd you stay, Bob, if there wasn't any base, there wasn't any town?
Well, this was sort of an emergency field, and that first night we camped out underneath the aircraft because the dirt felt better than the inside of the aircraft at that point.
When was your first chance to kick up your heels in happiness at completing this tough mission?
Well, if you don't count the wild motorcycle ride across the field in the middle of the night to report in, the next day when we flew to Marrakesh, we all headed for the nearest ice cream parlor.
And now, North Africa, and not at all what you expected or had arranged for.
No, North Africa, the war had moved on. There was no depot at Talergma, just a small detachment there. We had the problem then of gathering my force because all of them didn't land at Talergma. Some of them were so short of gas that they landed at the first spot they could get down. So they were scattered at some other fields, and I got them all together the next morning. Those that were flyable, and then we had the problem of getting back in shape for the mission to come home.
I'm just wondering if there wasn't anything there, how'd you get gas? Where'd you sleep? Where'd you eat?
Well, they had a detachment there, and it broke out some emergency rations, and we got something to eat, not much. The beer was pretty good, though.
That makes up for a lot.
There was a brewery operating in nearby that made something closer to American beer than we got in England, and that was very good. We got something to eat, and people slept in the airplanes or under the wing. It was nice warm weather and that time.
I was thinking suddenly dropping down into the Mediterranean for a little bathing must have been quite a, I mean, that's a real contrast to England.
It was, and young people, 19, 20 years old, most of them had never seen Africa or been out of the country before, and they became tourists very rapidly. But I finally, you can't do that until you get your airplane ready to go back. Get it gas, get the bombs loaded. If you need any holes patched and things of that sort, I got some help from a nearby bomb group that sent some people over to do the technical work that the crews couldn't do. After they got their airplanes ready to go, and we were there for 3 days before we went back, and we finally got about 85 airplanes flyable to go home with out of the 125 we started with.
The importance of the return to England by Colonel Curtis LeMay and the B-17 Flying Fortresses from North Africa was indicated by the presence of the top brass from 8th Air Force Headquarters at his base to greet Colonel LeMay upon his arrival. He had led the 3rd Division bombers on this historic mission. They were vitally interested in a briefing by Colonel LeMay as to the results and other details of this, the most important strategic air mission carried out in Europe up to that time.
I was happy with the mission because when we got to target, which is important, we had to pay an admission price, yes. But if you miss the target and have to go back again, the price is higher. It seemed to me that in the early days where we really didn't have enough over there to get anything much done, about all we accomplished was to train the Luftwaffe on...
General, you started out at the bottom and you went all the way to the top of the Air Force. Was there anything wrong at the top?
Top had to learn too. For instance, I had to learn how to be a commander. I'd never commanded anything in the Air Force before, and there I find myself commanding a division as a colonel when I had no command experience. I had to learn my job too. Everybody had to learn from the ground up.
It was tough in the ETO. It was wartime England, but there was no war between the Americans and their newfound friends. There were parties, picnics, movies, and dances. The fun-loving, happy-go-lucky Yanks made friends with everyone. They passed out gum and chocolate bars to the youngsters, and many of the young ladies of the villages were treated to a good time on the town at the local pub. Romances flourished, and many of the English girls became American war brides.
The relationships between the local people and the American servicemen were generally good, and in some cases some very special relationships were founded and bonds established which exist to this day. One of the most interesting stories I've heard is that of Pam Rudge. She was Pam Foreman when the GIs were at Thorpe Abbotts in 1943 and 1944. Pam's mother took in washing, laundry from the GIs on one of the sites not far from their house. And their house was on the main Ipswich-Norwich road. Mother did the washing. She'd wash everything except the GI's socks. She felt that was a bit too strong, so she let Grandad do that. But I won't say any more. Pam, you tell your story.
I was going back with some friends from school one day, and on the way towards their home, we passed Site 1. And that particular day, 2 Americans were playing baseball. I can see the baseball gloves on the hands, they're throwing and, you know, catching this baseball. And childlike, we asked if they had any candy or gum. And this little fella, who turned and smiled to us children, he went into his barracks and got quite a bit of candy and gum for us. And Hershey bars, I remember the Hershey bars very well. Mm-hmm. And I remember my mum saying to my brother that she would do one more American laundry. So I said, well, have you anyone to do your laundry? And he was over the moon about this. He said, no. I said, well, my mum will do your laundry for you if you so wished. So into his barracks he went, brought a great big duffel bag out of laundry, huge bag, and following him were several more Americans in that barracks, asking me if my mother would do theirs as well.
It's mid-afternoon on an October day in 1943. The ground crews at Air Station 139 in Thorpe Abbotts, England, await the return of a formation of B-17s from the 100th Bomb Group that took part in a raid over Munster, Germany. The mood on the ground is extremely tense. How many combat crews would survive this dangerous mission and return to the base? At 1600 hours, their questions are answered. A lone B-17, 2 of its engines shot out in the blazing air battles, glides onto the runway, the only survivor of 13 planes that left the base early this morning. That battered flying fortress was piloted by a young lieutenant from Brooklyn, New York. His name was Robert Rosenthal. And this is the beginning
of the Rosenthal legend. After playing ball in college and earning a law degree, the boy from Brooklyn enters the United States Army Air Corps in 1942. In the summer of 1943, Rosenthal and the other combat-ready crews arrive in England and become a part of the fledgling 8th Air Force. In the month of October, they took part in 3 consecutive missions that would bring a challenge to even the most hardened veteran combat crew members. The first mission is over Bremen. The mission the following morning takes them to Marienburg. This is to be one of the longest missions to date, and then on October 10th, 1943, at the early morning briefing session, Lieutenant Rosenthal and the other crews were told that the target for today was Munster, Germany. This turned out to be one of the most disastrous missions ever flown by a bomb group in the 8th Air Force. Lieutenant Rosenthal and his crew were the only ones to return to base.
Before his military service ended, Robert Rosenthal was to become one of the most decorated officers in the history of the United States Air Force. His tour of duty as a B-17 pilot included flying an incredible 52 combat missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. His unbelievable experiences included being shot down, not once, but twice. Bob's service records reveal the acts of daring, courage, and airmanship from which legends are made. It is estimated that more than 350,000 Americans served in the 8th Air Force during the war in Europe.
I know because I was one of them. I went into the service in 1942. I became a flying instructor at Randolph Field in Texas, and later I went overseas as a P-51 fighter pilot assigned to escort the bomber formations to their targets.
Of the United States Army Air Force losses in World War II were suffered by the 8th. More than 47,000 casualties with over 26,000 dead. The close relationships between the Americans and the British was evident. They joined the ground crews in sweating out the return of the battle-weary formations and share in the grief when the dead and wounded were removed from the planes or crash sites. A former commander of the 8th Air Force, General Robert T. Harris, has stated, "The veterans of the mighty 8th became the fathers of air power. They gave us the standards of personal courage, airmanship, and dedication by which our airmen, until the end of time, will be measured." There was rejoicing and relief when the war that had devastated Europe finally came to an end on May 8, 1945. The men and women of the 8th Air Force joined in the wild celebration. They went to England to help a friend in need. Their task now completed, they prepared to return to their homes in the States. However, a sense of loss and sadness was felt throughout the cities, villages, and rural areas as the Americans said goodbye to their English friends. The Liberators and Flying Fortresses then lifted off the runways for the last time. The Yanks were gone. Giant British liners and small victory ships, all loaded with GIs returning from Europe, steamed toward America in 1945. For the majority of those aboard, discharge and civilian life lay ahead. For many thousands who had served on foreign lands, the return trip home was filled with excitement and anticipation of a joyful and happy reunion with family and friends left behind when they went off to war. The reception they received upon returning to America was an experience they would long remember.
Good to see you. Oh, good.
What did you bring with you? Oh, Johnny.
It is a considerable compliment to the Americans who served here at Thorpe Abbotts in World War II that years after they left, a group of Englishmen have got together and refurbished some of the old buildings and turned them into a memorial museum. The man responsible in the first instance for this, his idea, was Mike Harvey. Mike, what got you into this?
Well, earlier in my working life, I was involved in demolition and pulled many of these old places down. I knew Thorpe Abbotts Control Tower and decided that I would try and restore the thing as a memorial.
For many, the war years soon became history and memories would fade away. But for others, the experiences, friendships, and memories would become a permanent part of their future lives. For decades, they would be driven by a compelling desire to return to England, where they had been stationed, to visit the old air bases, the local villages, renew acquaintances, swap stories of the war years, and remember those who died. Any return trip to England by men and women who served there during the war years is highlighted by an emotional visit to the American cemetery near the historic city of Cambridge to visit the honored graves of fallen comrades. The air battles over Europe proved to be very costly for combat crews of the 8th Air Force. Over 26,000 young aviators lost their lives. Many of them are buried here.
Let them in, Peter. They are very tired. Give them the couches where the angels sleep. Let them wake whole again to new dawns fired with sun, not war, and may their peace be deep. Remember where the broken bodies lie, and give them the things they like. Let them make noise. God knows how young they were to have to die. Give swing bands, not gold harps, to these our boys. Let them love Peter. They have had no time. Girls sweet as meadow wind with flowering hair. They should have trees and bird song, hills to climb. The taste of summer in a ripened pear. Tell them how they are missed. Say not to fear. It's going to be all right with us down here.
Recorded on the Great Wall of the Missing are the names of 5,125 Americans that were listed as missing in action. They died discharging their duty to our country and to free men everywhere. Out of their death came victory in Europe.
We now come to a little bit which is not in the program from France.
The presence of an elite group of former members of the French underground resistance movement who had saved the lives of hundreds of Allied airmen presented a special opportunity for all to show their heartfelt appreciation to their French benefactors. These brave patriots had placed their own lives in constant jeopardy with their acts of courage and heroism.
I'm very, very happy to be here. And it is thanks to this radio station in Paris, Radio Bleu, which is for young women of my age, 75. You give homage, rendre hommage, and gratitude to whatever the French underground was able to do. Anyhow, I'm very proud of my commendation from the King of England. I'm very happy. I hope to see a lot of you today. Goodbye.
We have come home. Thorpe Abbotts is our home. We feel that this land is ours as well as yours. This was our base during the war. We lived here. We fought from here. We flew from here. We spilled our blood here, and we died here. And this is where we came to know you. And when we came, we shared with you our aspirations for victory and for peace, and our dedication to freedom and liberty and justice. The Bloody 100, the most famous bomb group of the war, flew every tough mission. We, like other groups in the 8th Air Force, flew in daylight because the targets were easier to see. At the same time, we were easier targets for the enemy. Our great air generals, Hap Arnold, Tui Spotts, Ira Eaker, and the greatest air commander of all, General Curtis LeMay, planned and executed these daylight raids. We struck the enemy deep in their heartland at all times. The 100th Group flew where the action was, where the danger was greatest and the targets most crucial. Though they shot us down, nothing could quench the flaming and soaring spirit of this group.
Once, the skies over this ancient, history-rich land of Great Britain were filled with the sights and sounds of Allied warplanes. Many years later, the appearance of a lone, vintage B-17 Flying Fortress over the air base from which so many had flown combat missions brought excitement and tears to the eyes of the American veterans. English and European friends and wartime comrades in arms come to join in the renewal of a spirit that had created lifelong bonds of cherished friendships. The airmen that flew bombers and fighters out of England painted a legacy that could never be equaled. And now they're back. Back to the place where it all happened. Back where wounds and scars of a bygone era remain permanently a part of American and English history.
This runway, which launched the bombers of the Bloody Hundredth time and time again, if it could talk, what it could tell. The bombers of the Hundredth would take off, and in the half-light of dawn they would circle and join the bombers from all the other bases in East Anglia, from Nettishall and Snetterton Heath, from Rougham and Ridgewell and all those other very English names. And there in the sky, sometimes in the blue and sometimes in the clouds, they would circle and form their vast formations that would sometimes stretch from horizon to horizon. A sight like that is a sight you never forget. A sight which Hollywood could never recreate. All those vast formations, all those young men, perhaps 20,000 of them, up there going to war. Sights we shall never see again, sights the world will never see again, but sights we will never forget.